For good office space, we have amazing views out of these windows up here. This is one of the highest elevations in the metro area. We're actually higher up than the high-rise buildings in downtown Denver here. So great views, great offices. We only have 2 or 3 available offices right now, so let us know if you're interested. We'll give you a quick tour. I'm going to turn it over to Andoni here, and he's going to come up and tell you about. We're working with them to do kind of to take over the events that we're doing, and that'll start next year in January. And so, why don't you fill everybody in on what you're working on?
Good evening. My name is Andoni Lazzardi. I happen to be a marketing guy. Don't hold that against me. I'm the least technically able person in the room, which should make most of you feel real good because there's enough adults like me running around. At any rate, coming up this January, we're going to be starting a whole new series on the future. Something parallel to our speaker tonight. We're going to have a speaker this winter on the techno-apocalypse. When you see that, you're going to want to come and prepare notes. We're also going to be talking about the future of transportation, principally west of the Mississippi, and why this state has already lost billions of dollars and is set to lose billions and billions more. And what we can do about it. We're also going to be talking about medical devices changes regarding the future, both near-term and long-term future. We're going to be using panels in a lot of these things, so you're going to get an opportunity to see different people with different views. Now and then you'll see people on the same panel having opposite views, which makes it interesting. In the meanwhile, we have 2 sister organizations that we work with now to promote Vinci, and Vinci in turn is promoting them. For those of you who are not familiar with the technical term, it's called guerrilla marketing. One of the groups is called Creative Connections. They're the oldest group of its type here in the state. They're 10 years old. They have a tribe of about 9,000 people. We usually have nice, small, intimate meetings. This Friday at Commons on Champa, our topic is the creative paradox. So for those of you who are creative types, or see yourself as a creative type, or want to be a creative type, they're both out of the arts as well as business, as well as technology. Our speakers are going to be talking about how you handle your time, personally, professionally, and in your creative endeavors. Let's see. So that's the big thing for me. For those of you who might have an interest, Carol Wolf, why don't you wave to everybody, Carol? She serves on our advisory team with Creative Connections. Sarah Howard, you want to wave to everybody, Sarah? Sarah also works with us regarding Creative Connections. And I'm looking forward to tonight's speaker, so I'm going to shut up and sit down. Thank you.
So, Andoni, does that creative paradox, does that include using a shredder to shred your artwork?
Actually, if you want your artwork to really gain in value, you have to die. Okay? So, although nowadays, if you have a sexual scandal, that helps too.
Yeah.
So, you choose which one you want to do. In fact, the French call it, les petites morts. Who speaks French? Right? They call it the little death. Okay. Have a good evening. Yes. Yeah, we have a meeting at CATS. By the way, both of these groups are available on meetups if you want more information. The one will be Colorado Arts and Technology Series, and the one this Friday, they're all free at, help me, at Commons on Champa. Okay? That will be also on under Creative Connections on meetups. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, welcome everybody. So tonight's talk is on technological unemployment. So what comes to mind when you hear that phrase? Is it, a movie like Terminator where machines kind of control the entire world, or is it a movie like Elysium where people are addicted to lives of endless pleasure and they're easily controlled by corporations or governments? Any of the dozens of different science fiction books and movies which paint a dystopian picture of what it will be like as larger and larger fractions of the world are no longer required as technology rises. So tonight you're going to hear about a different possibility, known as a celebration society. It is one possible scenario for a future in which people are not replaced by machines, but instead are freed by them to devote themselves to the uniquely human pursuits of creation, invention, exploration, and celebration. All right, so in an unusual twist in our usual format, we've got two speakers. The first is Jennifer Dunn, who is a productivity coach and public speaker, and she is the author of the Amazon #1 bestseller Roar, Overcoming Obstacles in 3 Simple Steps. And the second is Kevin Weller, who is a technology expert, and he's the president of the Society of Humane Future Visionaries. Together they're going to describe how we can get from where we are now to this celebration society, a future where you won't just survive, you'll thrive. Copies of Jennifer's book are available for purchase back there. He's holding up a copy. So they're available for purchase back there, and I believe we have some kind of raffle. They're going to give away an autographed copy of the Celebration Society, and they've asked that if you have business cards, you put them in the bowl on the table back there. And a final note, the Da Vinci Institute stakes out no political territory, and so any views or implications or conclusions expressed in the talk are solely those of the speakers and not ours, so don't come to me with that. Yeah, just careful.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. This is going to be exciting and optimistic, as some of the folks in the audience have already heard. Just in case you were wondering, this is not a dystopian future. This is how to thrive in the future. Now, I had another opening to this speech in mind, and it was going to be lighthearted and talk about that moment when I discovered and experienced that I was living in a moment of pure celebration. And then I thought, all that's happening in the news, with everything going on the world stage, light-hearted and cheerful opening, it just didn't seem sufficient. So who wouldn't love to live in a celebration society? Someplace where you wouldn't have to worry about your health, your safety, paying the bills, or if there was some whack job out there who thought that you were the entire reason why their life was miserable. And if they could only eliminate you, their life would have to improve. Microphone? Oh. And where am I pressing?
The soft button right down there.
Okay. Alright, this is going to be difficult because I talk with my hands.
You have to
Get it
hold
really close, I
pretty
think.
Get it really close to my face. Alright. So, that safe and abundant future where you have no worries about these things, that is not the world we live in. And if you're really honest, you might be thinking to yourself, could it ever be the world we live in? What do your mathematical models predict? Is this talk of scarcity and post-scarcity and an abundant future, is that just wishful thinking? Is it a way to just distract us from our current reality? And the good news is, an abundant future will be a reality. There's only 2 questions. How fast will it get here? And does an abundant future mean it will be abundant for all of us, or just for a limited subset of us that control the means of both production and distribution? Now we, folks who are speaking here tonight, believe that an abundant future is possible within this century. Not only that, it's likely to occur within the first half of the century. And Kevin is going to be giving you all the details, exactly how that's going to happen later tonight. But I want to talk to you about how you can thrive in a celebration society right now, in the current world as it stands. But wait, didn't I just say that a celebration society wasn't the world we lived in? That it wasn't going to be happening until sometime later this century? Well, yes, I did say that. That's a full celebration society. And a full celebration society will have unlimited resources, unlimited energy, and the ability for everyone in that society to devote themselves to excellence in whatever they choose. That's where we're going, and that is still some distance in the future. But there are elements of a celebration society that are here right now. And these tiny little elements, these are the things that are sparks that can burst into a brilliant bonfire of hope that will light our way into the future. You are part of many groups. We know that because we just heard about some of the many groups that people were part of before I got up here to speak. There are people that you work with. There are people who believe in the same religion as you do. Your family, groups and organizations, such as the Da Vinci Institute. Sports, whether you might be in a bowling league or a golf league, or you're a booster for your kids' little league, or you're just a really avid Broncos fan. These are all different groups. But now think for a moment. How many of these groups really work? And by work, I mean not only for you, but for every member of that group. You get more out of being a member than it costs you to be a member. How many of these groups you're part of in your life work? Most of them? Half of them? A quarter of them? If we want technological unemployment to produce a celebration society, we need to make sure that the groups that are responsible for implementing these technologies and these automations work for everyone that is a part of that group. Consider environmental regulations. No one wants to live in a toxic swamp. Yet there are plenty of companies, even plenty of countries, that were happy to create ecological disasters in the name of profit. Why? Because they reaped the benefit and someone else paid the cost. Unfortunately, automation could be very similar. A company gains the benefit of automating. They get rid of this expensive person and they lower their costs by using a much less expensive automation. But that person who's no longer employed, who may not even be employable in the future, who pays for that person? It's not the company, it's someone else. So how different would it be if not just the companies, but everyone responsible, all of the groups, whether they were the cities, the towns, the states, the countries, they all paid attention to the needs of all of the people that made them up, not just where the profit came from. There are companies that behave like this. Well-respected, thriving companies. In fact, one of our allies worked for Toyota, and he was responsible for closing down a manufacturing plant for Toyota due to economic necessity. And he could have simply shut the doors one day and said, oh well, the company can't afford this plant anymore, that's all there is to it. But instead, he took 4 years, and he slowly wound down the plant, and he made sure that everyone who had worked there actually benefited from the plant's closing instead of being injured by it. When the day came for them to finally close the door on that plant, they had a party, and they celebrated him for what he had done for them. It's possible to think of everyone as part of your group, and not just the people who are taking the profit out. So how then can our social order be transformed? Not by individuals, maybe a few super powerful individuals. However, none of those are in the room here today. We're all regular people. And regular people are not going to change the world, certainly not all at once. But what we can do is we can go back to those groups that we're a part of. And we can make sure that each one of those groups starts to work better for all of the people in it. And then, as those groups start getting better, all of the other people in those groups will begin making the same changes to the other groups they're in, and it will slowly ripple outward. And the change will eventually transform society. This lady on the screen is Eleanor Ostrom. She's a Nobel laureate, and in her Nobel-winning work, she identified the 8 principles for healthy groups. What is it that makes a group work? Now, you want that group to work for the benefit of everyone in it, and not to let it be co-opted for the needs of an individual or a few individuals within the group at the expense of everyone else. Her group structure has been used to help people in California manage water rights, to help people in New York create, establish, and maintain community parks. It's even gold standard randomized controlled trial of at-risk youth schooling. So those youth who in their education used these 8 principles of how to be part of a healthy group ended up not just outperforming the other at-risk children, they outperformed the regular children using the regular schooling. That's how much these groups work. So I'll describe the 8 different keys in detail. The first and the most important is clearly defined boundaries. Now, the reason for the importance of boundaries is that you need to know what part of your life is this group controlling. So think about it for a moment. If your work group says, I would like you to work 60 to 80 hours a week, and that's what I think you should be doing as a productive, contributing member of this work group. Your family group, on the other hand, thinks to be a productive, contributing member of this family, you should be spending evenings and weekends with the other members of the family. Here's a question for you. Who controls where you eat dinner? Is it your work group? Is it your family group? Do you alternate between them? Whichever one you allow to control this, the other group is going to think you have failed to contribute what you should have to be a good member of the group. You are letting everyone else down. You are a drain on the group rather than a good member of the group. You've broken your agreements with them. That's why boundaries are necessary, so that in any given situation you know which group has a call on your behavior and how you should be acting. The second key to good groups is that the benefits have to be proportional to the costs. Now, if you contribute more time, more money, more energy to your group, and there are other people who don't contribute as much, but they get the same amount of benefits, or even greater amounts of benefits, well, you're not going to stay in that group for very long. 3 years ago, there was a millionaire who owned a company, and he decided that he was going to give a big raise to everyone at the company. The minimum wage at his company was going to be $70,000 a year. The best employees, the ones that he relied on most and did the most for his company, were outraged. Many of them quit because he had broken this rule. These were people who devoted years to his company, who had sacrificed in their personal lives for the good of the company. And now they saw other people who were new to the company, who hadn't made those kind of sacrifices, and they were getting the same reward. And that wasn't fair. And I'm sure most of you have been in meetings like that, work groups where there's one person who carries most of the load, and there's one person who can barely be bothered to show up for meetings. And those groups don't work well. In fact, they tend to build up a lot of resentment and end up turning toxic. The third key to a good working group is that you have to have collective choice arrangements. And what that means is you have to have a way that everyone agrees on to make decisions. And everyone's input has to be involved in the decision somehow. Now, you don't have to have 100% agreement from everybody in the group. You don't even need to build a consensus. It's up to the group to define how are you going to do this. So, for example, when I was in college, I had 7 friends who shared an apartment. And they decided that what they were going to do is each day of the week would belong to one of them, and on that day, they would decide what was served for dinner in the house and what chores were assigned to all the different members. Well, they quickly learned that if they skimped on making dinner one night, that their roommates were going to get back at them, and every single one of them was going to be serving Kraft macaroni and cheese the rest of the week. They also learned that if they assigned toilet cleaning duties a little too frequently to the same person, that person was going to assign the duties right back to them. So they ended up learning that they needed to make decisions for the benefit of everyone in the house and not their personal benefit. And that's what collective choice arrangements arrangements or agreements, whichever way, are all about. The fourth key is monitoring. Now, however you reach these decisions, you need to monitor whether or not the group members are actually adhering to what they've agreed to do. Now, if a resource is jointly maintained, say it's a trout pond, well, you need some way of monitoring how many fish each person takes out of that pond. And if you don't do that, someone can just come in, fish the pond bare, and there are no repercussions. So how do you do that monitoring? Self-reporting? Well, the person who's lying about how many fish they're taking is just going to lie on their report and tell you they took the minimum number of fish. What about an authority that maintains inspections and sees whether or not people are actually doing what they're supposed to do? I think we can all agree that we have seen with the construction industry exactly how open to corruption that particular methodology is. It will not work for the long run. What you really need is some method that is impartial, that is automatic, and that isn't open to tampering. An example that comes to mind is the smokestacks in large power plants or manufacturing facilities that have a little ring of sensors around the top. And it tells them whether or not any environmental contaminants are coming out in the smoke. And they're automatic, and they are completely oblivious to tampering. I suppose if you were willing to climb up 80 feet in the sky and hang a balloon down the smokestack to kind of block it, you might be able to tamper with it, but it's not cost effective to tamper with it. The fifth key is graduated sanctions. This means that when someone does something wrong, well, the first time you tell them, hey, you did something wrong, let me explain the rules again, just in case you didn't get it, and show you what you did wrong. But by the time someone has established a pattern of wrong behavior, they have stronger and stronger and stronger penalties that are going to be given to them. So for example, I was a member of an eco-community. And in this eco-community, one of our fellow members cut down a community tree. He didn't realize it was a community tree. He thought it was on his side of the property line. So they explained to him that no, this belonged to the community, and had him replant a tree that was roughly comparable to the one that he cut down. On the other hand, there was also a very involved aquaponics system that took all of the water from the community, ran it through a series of fish ponds, collected all of the outflow from the fish ponds, and used it to raise vegetables and crops for the community. One of the landowners that had a pond on his property went out, harvested all of the fish, and served them up for dinner. He was informed that when he bought the property, he'd been told it was part of the system, and he really couldn't do that because it messed up the system. So the community put new fish in, the fish got bigger, and he harvested them all again. And at this point, he was told, well, if you're going to insist that you own all the fish in that pond, you will be required to pay for us to dig a new pond that we can then run all of the community's water through, so that the system that's responsible for growing all these crops will work effectively. That would be an example of a much stronger penalty. The sixth key is that you need some way of fast and fair conflict resolution. Now, in this country, we can get reasonably fair conflict resolution by taking something to the courts. This is not, however, even beginning to approach a fast resolution. It can take years just to get a court date. On the other hand, in some other countries, such as Uruguay, where my best friend's in-laws are from, you get very fast justice. You can get in front of a judge within a week, and he will decide for your case. However, he doesn't decide based on fairness. He decides on the size of the bribe that each of the plaintiffs have given to him, and whoever gave him the most money, the case is decided in that person's favor. The seventh key is local autonomy. Now, local autonomy means that you have the ability to do something about whatever it is your group has decided. No one's going to belong to a group where they have made this great plan of action, they've put all this time and energy and effort into it, but then they can't implement it. They can't do anything. An example of this is back in the 90s. There were historical romance houses closing left and right. And there was a woman who decided that she knew a lot of historical romance authors, so she was going to start her own publishing business. And she got books from all of her friends to launch this business, and she paid for those books by giving them shares of stock in her new company. And then, since she needed to raise money to print the books, she sold shares of stock to other people to raise money to print the books. And it came as a complete and total surprise to her that there was this thing called the Securities and Exchange Commission. And they had a whole bunch of rules about how you could issue and sell stock, most of which she had broken. She had to give back all of the money she'd raised and promptly went bankrupt. That's someone who did not have the amount of autonomy that they thought they did. Finally, appropriate external relations. Groups need relationships with other groups. Now, for example, my brother was the director of urban development in a small city in New York State. And if groups wanted to accomplish something, they wanted to renovate or restore or even build an existing structure, they'd come to him. And he'd be the one who would decide, yes, your plan has merit. Let me hook you up with the legal resources you need, the permits you need. Get buy-in from your neighbors who will then get behind this project. All these different things could take up to 3 years to get into place. But if projects did not have connections with all these different groups, something could come up and totally derail the project. For example, one of the projects started before he took over was to renovate a city park. It seemed simple enough. They were going to turn this park that was just grassland into a nice playground and put all this lovely playground equipment in the park that all the children in the nearby area would be able to use. One little thing they forgot. They did not get permits to put in sidewalks, so no one could actually get to the playground equipment. This is why it's important to connect with all of the groups that are involved in anything that your group may be doing. So, if you practice enhancing these 8 different principles in all of the groups that you're part of today, you will quickly discover that you are transforming your life and your world in the direction of a celebration society. Celebration societies have 2 different aspects. There's the personal aspect, and then there's the technological aspect. Now, if the groups you're part of have healthy group dynamics, like we've just described, then the personal aspect will be taken care of. And that just leaves the technological aspect, which Kevin will be speaking on, except for he just ran out of the room. So I'm not sure what we're supposed to do now because our next speaker isn't here.
Other question?
Okay. He's hurrying. All right, Kevin, you're up.
I have a Barbie butter, what can I say?
All right, do you want the...
Well, I was going to try to set this up, but hopefully I can figure it out fairly quickly here. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe not. Well, I don't know because...
Do you want me to do the clicky for you?
No.
Focus?
All
All right.
I can manage, I think.
Okay.
Let me grab my... This is on? Okay, this is on. All right. Escape this. 3. And I think we're in business. All right. So, policymakers have targeted immigration and outsourcing as causes of domestic job loss. While in the past this may have been true, a recent widely cited study by Ball State University has found that 90% of manufacturing job losses in this century have been due to automation. While we can't be certain how pervasive or how fast such job losses will occur going forward, they are inevitable. Oxford, Nomura, Brookings, and other research groups are all forecasting losses of 40% or greater in the next decade or two. These figures are far more extreme than the Great Depression, which peaked at 25% unemployment. Repetitive physical jobs are at immediate risk. We're already talking about manufacturing jobs, of course, which we're already witnessing some of that. But think of, there's lots of other options. I mean, lots of other impacted jobs. Think of all the taxi drivers and truck drivers that will eventually be out of a job because of automated vehicles. And make no mistake, that will happen. Despite all the negative press in recent months due to accidents, think about natural gas being an explosive substance, and yet it's ubiquitous because the value outweighs the risk. But even certain analytical white-collar professions, thinking of attorneys and accountants, are increasingly at risk due to artificial intelligence. I believe, right or wrong, that I personally will be okay for the rest of my own career. Partly because most of the work that I do for my clients is automating their businesses. So I have some pretty direct experience with this. I am automating one business with straight up software and data processing techniques now, but they want to move on to AI to even take that even further. And so they're a growing company and they're not going to need to hire nearly as many employees to get the job done. So I have to ask myself, how are my kids going to make a living in the future, or my grandkids? What about yours? How are they going to survive the inevitable social unrest that comes from massive unemployment? I can't assume that my kids will be able to do what I do. First of all, it's going to change dramatically through the rest of my lifetime. Plus, they really aren't a chip off the old block. Think of all the great monarchs in history, and think about how often their offspring turned out to be some of the worst monarchs in history. Kids they have their own characteristics, their own traits, their own personalities. So, and some of mine I think will be fine, some won't. On the other hand, as a curious and nerdy child, I found acceptance and hope for the future of science and sustainable technology in service of mankind on TV. And though Star Trek was born only a few months before I was, I became a fan at age 5, when it was first released into syndication. At first, all this shiny, blinking technology drew my young and curious eyes, like a mobile over a baby's crib. But later, what kept me as a fan was its vision of diverse people working together to learn, explore, and improve each other's lives. It was a strong, optimistic antidote to the terrors of future shock and all the hatred and prejudice in the world. With the right technologies, energy sources, and economic and social structures, we will eventually be able to leave most of the drudgery to robots and their computer brains, freeing us up to pursue the more nuanced aspects of science, exploration, the arts, and whatever our hearts desire. I'm going to share with you the key enabling technologies now in hand or emerging from laboratories that make at least some of this possible in the near future. First, though, I want to share our conceptual understanding of material abundance. You'll recall that Jennifer spoke about abundance in a wider sense. But without material abundance, a society can't meet everyone's basic needs. Since the initial publication of Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations in 1776, economists have generally relied on much of its language in scarcity management concepts, including its description of the pillars of wealth as land, or as we might call natural resources, labor or human resources, and capital, typically money, factories, equipment, and so forth. However, much of its language and conception is stretched to the breaking point to describe modern and future economic realities. For example, once you create a software application, it takes negligible effort to copy it as many times as needed, and requires no special material resources to operate other than power, computers, and nowadays, the ease of distribution offered by the internet. As a result, the cost of its distribution is nearly free. Money itself is no longer tied to specific physical resources, such as gold or silver, and is created and destroyed as needed to maintain economic balance by the monetary policy governing the banking system. Nowadays, it is primarily a fiction that is generated and maintained by computers and their transactional data. My friend and colleague Jonathan Kober, and at the desk in the back of the room, literally wrote the book on Adam Smith when he published Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, a 21st century translation and commentary. Jonathan has since generalized the requirements for creating the supply side of wealth in the real world, beyond the fiction of money, to these. The raw materials, I think that speaks for itself, the energy, whether it's mechanical, electrical, food for laborers, power for robots, and so forth, to transform these materials into whatever is deemed useful. And the organizing intelligence to determine, enable, and oversee this transformation, which, historically is labor, management, entrepreneurs, and increasingly software and artificial intelligences. Can anyone here come up with an exception to these? I guess I should have silenced my iPad in there. Well, if nobody can, you're in good company. No one else has ever found a genuine exception. The law of supply and demand says that if we can create effectively unlimited supplies of all three of the decades ahead, the prices of necessities have to plunge toward free, just like the price of software and information distribution over the internet has. We're not there yet with the wider economy, and we won't be for decades. Fortunately, there is a bridge to that future of abundance available to us. And Jennifer will talk about that next. For now, I want to explain how a world of greater abundance will be feasible in the near future. Let's start with energy. Shortages, limited fuel supplies, the end of oil, global warming, the unreliability of renewables, all these are in the media these days. But when you stop to think about it, did it work? No. Effectively, inexhaustible supplies of energy are available to us, quite likely until the sun itself dies. We only need the will to harness it intelligently. For example, energy storage technologies are advancing so quickly that, in only a few short years, concerns about the reliability of renewable energy when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow will become a thing of the past. Consider the glass battery under development by John Goodenough. That's actually his name. Goodenough, the well-known co-inventor of the lithium-ion battery that powers our mobile devices and electric cars today. Glass batteries potentially offer triple the energy storage, nearly instant recharging, and much greater safety than lithium ions. And Goodenough is no fly-by-night huckster, as the experts in the field readily testify to his credibility. In the longer term, solar power collecting satellites will be able to wirelessly beam always-on energy directly to receiving stations on the ground, regardless of weather conditions or the fall of night. Peter Glaser and Gerard O'Neill realized this back in the 1970s, only needing launch costs to shrink enough to make it feasible, as they are beginning to now with the advent of more reusable rockets thanks to the likes of Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. Nuclear has received a bad rap in recent decades due to the problems of capital intensity, waste, promotion of weapons proliferation, and high-profile accidents. However, there are much simpler, safer, and non-weapon fueling power-generating fission technologies based on abundant thorium supplies worldwide. In fact, a thorium reactor can eat the more poisonous hot byproducts of uranium plants and turn them into relatively safe elements. Additionally, biofuels use environmentally neutral or even beneficial processes involving algae, hemp, and so forth can provide significant portable energy when and where it's needed. Finally, once we crack the fusion power generation challenge, our power supplies into the distant future is all but assured. So turning to raw materials, access to clean water is one of the biggest geopolitical conflict generators these days, and will eventually surpass oil in that regard. But with all the abundant energy sources I just surveyed for us, desalination and purification of seawater or dirty water becomes infinitely more economical. Bioplastics offer many of the advantages of petroleum-based plastics, but without polluting the environment we all depend on. These only require the abundance of organic matter available in algae, plants, and other living things. The asteroids in our solar system, I skipped one. Advanced carbon materials are potentially lighter yet stronger than steel. Carbon is the foundation of the chemistry of life. Without massive supplies, life as we know it would not have been possible on Earth. Okay, now we'll get to asteroids. The asteroids in our solar system represent a truly astounding quantity of raw materials, from precious metals to carbon to water in the form of ice. And the subterranean oceans of moons throughout the solar system by themselves represent many multiples of the water in all of Earth's oceans. As space travel becomes more economical, mining these resources will become a virtual necessity. Neil deGrasse Tyson just stated on Fox News that he expects the first trillionaire to be the one who first exploits space resources such as these. Coming back down to Earth, recycling technologies are in their infancy. Going forward, with the abundant energy I've discussed, we will have such marvels as plasma converters to transform many quote-unquote waste materials into fuels, building materials, and so forth. There we go. And finally, coming back down to Earth, recycling technologies are in their infancy. Going forward, with the abundant energy I've discussed, we will have such... Did I already cover that? There. Okay, finally, advanced virtual and augmented reality. I'm losing all these... I did all these fancy animations are not working out like I hoped they would on stage. Okay, advanced virtual augmented reality will bring many otherwise matter-intensive experiences to the masses. Without the actual materials. Imagine all the energy, time, and cost savings of a transcontinental meeting with the same fidelity as an in-person meeting, without the need to travel with all this consumption, pollution, and inconvenience. Consider that even with possession of some physical product, all we really ever have is the experience of it with attendant thoughts and sensations. Additionally, these virtual technologies can enable experiences that would literally be impossible in the physical world, both in terms of kind and scale. All right. Finally, we need organizing intelligence to direct all this matter and energy to produce useful products and experiences. Nature won't do this for us, even in hunting and gathering societies. Historically, organizing intelligence has been primarily provided by people. But with the exponential proliferation of sensors, robots, software, artificial intelligence, and construction from pre-built modular components and 3D printers, much of this intelligence is being automated as we speak. Beyond robots and AIs producing all the necessities and luxuries of life for us, consider the probability that we will have 3D printers in our homes one day manufacturing what we need, when we need it, customized to our needs and preferences, based on infinitely copyable modular patterns available on the internet. There is very little work on our part as a consumer, with most of the work being done by the technology. The initial designers could have finished their work a long time ago. With all this, is there any doubt left that we will eventually get there? Perhaps sooner than we think for some applications and jobs. Despite this, we will still need clean and efficient transportation for many practical purposes. There are many such technologies under development, but the most promising at the moment include autonomous electric cars and vacuum-based mass transit options such as Elon Musk's Hyperloop and Daryl Oster's evacuated tube transport, for which much of the required infrastructure can be built for a fraction of the cost of our current road systems. The latter could make travel between New York and Beijing possible in 2 hours. We also need ecologically sound places to live, work, and play, places where we can fully explore these possibilities. Seasteading offers one such possibility, where we build modular floating communities to generate power from thermal energy conversion, raise food from the bounty of the sea, and otherwise nourish aquatic ecology for present and future generations. And there's much more we can do than I can cover in this brief overview, but we'll save that for another time. So in all fairness, we are decades away from full implementation of some of these ideas, and there is great uncertainty in the meantime about how the average citizen will continue to make a living as automation incrementally takes over. With the right economic and governing institutions, the transition can be made much less painful than another Great Depression on steroids. We need a transition tool, and fortunately, we have one. There is a remarkably workable model for a market-oriented universal basic income, where every citizen gets a living stipend and can earn more if they want to work at something that is still marketable. This would eliminate all the bureaucracy surrounding means and needs tested welfare, virtually paying for itself. Jennifer will go into further detail about this in a few minutes. But first, I'd like to open up the floor for any additional questions about what I've covered so far. Yeah.
I'm curious about the true recycling. Could you say a little bit more about that, and what are the barriers to those technologies now?
Well, that might be better. Jonathan, did you think you want to take that one?
Plasma converters already exist. The U.S.
Come up to
military
use the
and
microphone so they can hear you.
have functioning units.
Thanks, Kevin. You bet.
Plasma converters essentially take any kind of material that's input via, for example, a conveyor belt that could be planted right in the middle of a huge urban disposal site. And anything that's not radioactive is processed and then either converted into elemental components for reuse, or a small percentage, I think it's 3 or 5%, becomes a slag that's useful as building materials. So at this point, so far as I can discern, the only thing preventing the widespread deployment of these is the cost-benefit analysis of rolling out those initial sites, and there are increasing numbers of companies looking seriously at this.
Where does the energy come from these?
The plasma converters actually use a process called pyrolysis, which is much hotter than conventional burning. Organic materials, plastics for example, which are of course part of the waste feed, are consumed, and they not only generate enough power to run the plasma converter, but they additionally generate excess power that can be sold off for other uses.
He knows way more about that than I do, that aspect of it. Yes.
Yes, you quoted Dr. Tyson's thesis of the first trillionaires were made with asteroid money.
Yes.
How did you know? How can he explain the horrific cost of getting up into space and recovering that stuff? That's far more valuable than anything on the planet right now. Just the cost to get up there.
We get the cost up there, they get the cost of getting the material back, you know, what's the best way of getting it back? Yeah, all that stuff has to be worked out. I think he was kind of assuming that we would eventually work out how to do that, and we probably will have to if we want those resources. And so, yeah, there's a significant investment. I think we need to develop the technology further. You know, getting the launch costs down, getting our space technology up to par to be able to do that. We're really not there yet, but I think we will eventually get there, and then we'll have way more resources than we have available to us here on the planet. But I think he is being speculative. Yes, I mean there is a lot of speculative element to this.
If I could just briefly add to what Kevin said, there's a concept called cheap access to space, or CATS. You'll see that acronym if you follow space enthusiast communities. The essential idea is that it's tremendously expensive to lift any kind of payload out of the gravity well that we live in to the zero gravity environment up there. The efforts to develop reusable rocketry are a big step in this direction. They will significantly cut those costs. And beyond that, as we begin to build actual functioning infrastructure in space, not just research facilities such as the International Space Station, but space stations that manufacture things on site for further construction. We have the possibility of largely automated replication of systems, so that things such as, for example, the solar power satellites, which Kevin talked about, can be built by robots that basically have two functions. First function, build more robots. Second function, each robot builds a solar power satellite component. And so it expands exponentially.
Right. Does that help?
Well,
All right. Yeah, anybody else?
Still 2 orders of magnitude.
What's that?
Still 2 or 3 orders of magnitude away.
Yes. Some of this technology that we've discussed is more near term. Some of it is more distant. Right. And so, like I said, it's an incremental process. It takes time. Yeah.
If we were to have a conversation with our kids and grandkids, what would you recommend for careers,
Oh, yes.
industries of the future?
That's a good question. I would say anything that involves building that automation is one aspect. There are certain careers that are probably safe for a long time, you know, like nursing, and for instance. I think it's going to be a long time, if ever, if we really replace that profession. And really, I would say the biggest factor, though, if you step back a bit, our education system has been built to produce factory workers who have, they're cogs in the wheel. They don't have to understand the bigger system. They just have to do their job over and over and over again. And so we've got a education system that's based on, memorization of facts, and there's some element of thinking training, but not very much. And so you don't produce a lot of people with entrepreneurial thinking processes. And I think that's the thing that if, regardless of which career you choose, I would say they need to be able to be more general problem solvers. And they may need to study outside the existing education system or find schools that already teach or guide students to find their own education. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's what I would say, yeah.
As you've pointed out, many of these, in many of these domains, whether it's energy efficiency, efficient use of materials, declining costs of renewables, these are incremental improvements that are going to take place over decades.
Yes.
Meanwhile, we have exponentially growing population, and you didn't talk about that, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role of population growth and or population stabilization in achieving a sustainable society.
Right, that's right. So the demand side is what you're addressing there, right? Well, I think the latest research says that as a race we are going to be leveling off. In fact, the more people feel secure economically, the more quickly I think the population growth will level off. I don't know if it's quite as exponential as been. Jonathan discussed that in his book. He might be able to address that a little more.
Just add something to what Kevin said. United Nations has studied this. They are forecasting a permanent leveling off of world population levels circa mid-century. Reason is that they found that the primary driver of these large families, especially in third world countries, is the need for economic security. In the absence of a functioning, reliable social security system, what choice do people have to provide for their old age other than to produce a lot of children? And further, they know that some of those children are going to die before that happens because of the conditions in which they live. So when those fears are soothed and people can rely upon systems to take care of them in their old age, the reproduction rate drops toward, I think the expected level is 2.1, and indeed in countries such as Japan, Russia, China, albeit artificially, and the United States, the internal population replenishment is below the maintenance level. Immigration is needed in order to sustain population levels. Big problem for Japan.
Yeah, it is.
Just a follow-up.
Yeah.
What is the anticipated leveling off? At what? How many billion?
I would think a lot of that depends on, what happens with these economic systems and so forth, but yes.
I don't recall the specific number. Perhaps someone else in the room does. But
We're at
not.
7.6 billion now, so you're probably talking about 8.5 billion. Right now, we're a little over 7.6 billion.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? All right, then I think I can turn this back over to Jennifer. Let me get you escape. Is that the right spot? I think we have to hit play, though. We have to it's Microsoft. I don't know.
It's Microsoft.
I usually. Yeah, that's it. Okay, I'm gonna get out of the way now.
Okay, so Kevin talked a little bit about something called the market-oriented universal basic income, or the MOBI, which I like a lot better because it's shorter and it's easier to say. We've heard a little bit about where we are now. Kevin told you a little bit about where we're headed. The question that I've heard, in fact, asked of Kevin is how we get from here to there. And the best method that we've found to tie that all together is market-oriented universal basic income. What is the really big problem with increased automation? It's technological unemployment. Kevin touched on this a little earlier. People not only become unemployed, they become downright unemployable. Think of the millions of people who drive trucks or who are shop clerks. These people are probably not going to be able to be retrained for a high-tech, innovative job. They've got plenty of skills, but not that skill set. And they're probably not going to be able to learn it simply because their brains don't think that way. And the skills that they're used to are no longer being valued. The existing welfare support systems will be absolutely unable to handle this influx of millions and millions of people. So consider back in 2008, 2009, we had the tech crash. We had the housing crisis. We stretched the welfare support of our country nearly to the breaking point. Congress had to enact a whole bunch of emergency actions just to make ends meet for all of these people who were out of work. It was 10% unemployment at the height of that crisis. Compare that with the Great Depression. Massive unemployment, 25%. That changed the face of our country as we knew it. The projections for the technological unemployment in the 2020s is 40%. So if the Great Depression was twice as bad as what we saw in 2008 and 2009, the technological unemployment of the 2020s will be twice as bad as that. But wait, that's bad enough, but it gets worse because the official unemployment figures only calculate the people who are currently trying to get a job. It does not take into consideration the very young, the very old, the infirm, or the ones who have just given up and are now relying on friends and family to support them. Once you calculate all of those people into the equation as well, the percentage of the population that is without work is going to be much greater than 50%, which means the percent of the population who does have a job, who's less than half of the population, there is no possible way that those people can support all of the other ones. Another system is required. That's where universal basic income comes in. Now there's two big problems that most people think about when they think about universal basic income. And the first is that it's actually taking money away from the poor people who need it. Most of the UBI proposals that are out there say that you take all the money that's currently going to welfare and the other social support services, and you take that money and you put it into UBI so that you give everybody a piece of the pie. Well, that doesn't work, because now the poor people who were relying on those social services are not even getting that much money. That's why MOBI is a better solution, because it doesn't do that. The other perceived problem is that if you pay people enough that they don't have to work, they're not going to work. Instead, you're just going to have an entire society of people who sit around all day on the couch watching TV, and the economy is just simply going to collapse. And MUBI solves both of these problems. First of all, it's not funded from existing welfare programs. It's not funded from existing taxes. It's not even funded from new taxes. What it is rather than redistributing wealth that's already out there, it just creates it. Because that's, as Kevin said earlier, how modern money is actually made. The central banks simply create it. They put in their ledger a notation as to which of the commercial banks has received money from them, and they mark down how much additional money has entered the money supply. And then if inflation is happening and they need to withdraw money from the money supply, well, they just do the opposite. And they mark down which central bank they took the money from and how much of it they took out of the money supply. The movie also encourages work because, let's face it, the current welfare programs inhibit working. And if you are on welfare and you try to get a job, well, first of all, you're not making enough on welfare to pay for all the costs that are involved in getting a new wardrobe so you look professional, in having transportation to take you out to all of these interviews, for printing up copies of your resume. But even if you were able to get the money to do that, and you got a job, all of a sudden you would lose your welfare benefits. And the job might be temporary. So you'd have a couple of weeks where you would be working and making money from the job. That's not enough to be vested in any company's healthcare program. So you're paying for all of that out of pocket until you can be vested. That's not enough to be making most benefits of working at a company. However, it's enough to lose all your benefits under welfare. You're really not incentivized to work if you're collecting welfare. And in fact, there are many people who work and still need to get welfare. Amazon CEO Jeff Bezos recently raised the minimum rate of all of his employees to at least $15 an hour, which he considered to be enough for them to make a livable wage. In his announcement of this, he cheerfully pointed out that Walmart employees who did not make $15 an hour often had to be on welfare even though they had a full-time job because they couldn't make enough to get above the poverty line just on the amount they could make working at Walmart. On the other hand, studies have shown that if you give people unconditional payments, where you don't take into account how much money do you already get, but we just say every single person, here's your weekly payment. Well, now they're not disincentivized from working. Now they have the natural human reaction that they want to be recognized for their contributions. They want to feel like their lives matter. And so the studies have shown that if you give unconditional payments to people, they start businesses. They engage in creative explorations and produce artwork. Or they choose to serve their community in some fashion through volunteerism or through helping to better their local communities in local community government programs. Even more, we've been talking about how the number of jobs is going to reduce in the future based on automation. But that just means that the overall amount of work that is required to have people do it will reduce. That doesn't mean the number of jobs will reduce. Because if you have a minimum basic income that meets your basics, you no longer need your job to provide enough income to meet all of your needs. You just need that gap from your basics to the stuff you really want, the lifestyle that you choose to have. You may be able to support that difference with a part-time job or some sort of job sharing. Therefore, the number of available jobs can be spread among more people and get the benefit to help more people. Even after people think, hey, this really sounds like a good idea, I like this minimum basic income, there's this niggling little bit of concern that they will never let it happen. The powers that be, the moneyed interests. After all, these folks have more money and more power than anyone else, and they definitely have a strong interest in preserving the fact that they've got more money and more power than everyone else. They certainly don't want any of their money going to the other people. That's the beauty of the movie, because it's not redistribution. It's not taking from anybody. It's creating new money. And this new money is coming in at the bottom. And what are those people using it for? Well, they're using it for their necessities of life. They're buying more stuff they couldn't afford before, which is actually driving up the demand and increasing the profits of the companies that produce that stuff. So rather than taking money away from the moneyed interests, it's actually putting money in their pocket because it's making their companies more profitable. So what it's really doing is a transformation from the haves and have-nots to the haves and have-mores. How does it work? Well, it starts out very low. You don't want to do anything that's going to traumatize the economic system and cause big waves through the financial community. One of the projections calls for starting with merely $10 a week. And then each week, the amount that people receive in their movie would go up by another $10. Now, the central banks already monitor unemployment. They already monitor inflation. These are the things that they adjust the bank lending rate to try and take into consideration and balance. The movie would just be yet another thing that they could use to try and balance this. They'd take a look, and if the unemployment rate was still higher than the inflation rate, they could put more money into the system. If the unemployment rate was actually lower than the inflation rate, they'd take money out of the system. It's what they do now. This would just be a more efficient way for them to do it. Now, the reason it works is because of the flow of money. I talked about if you put the money in at the bottom, those people are using that money to buy the necessities of life. What about the people above them who already have jobs, they're doing okay, they're also collecting that movie money. What are they doing with it? Well, they're going to buy some basics that they had been putting off because they couldn't afford the big expenditures. They're also going to be buying luxuries. They're going to be improving the quality of their life. And then finally, the folks at the very top of the pyramid, the ones who own the companies or who own pieces of a lot of companies through stock, they're doing just fine. They don't need the movie. So what they'll do with that money is they'll invest it. And because of that, it comes out of the everyday economy. And therefore, it's self-selecting and removing it from the economy. I've been talking about the basic movie, but there are also a few enhancements from the gentleman who has proposed the system. One of the things he's recommended is that you get rid of all of income tax entirely. Because by his way of looking at it, income tax is penalizing the people who are actually doing work and producing things. What you want to do is put the tax on the people who are buying things and consuming. So how this works for the movie is that the central banks would be authorized to create a very tiny inflation tax. And this inflation tax would be tied to the amount of spending you did. Because if too many people are spending too much money and the supply has not risen to meet that increased demand, you're going to get inflation. Therefore, the more money you spend, the more likely you are to trigger inflation. So the more money needs to be taken out of the system to counteract that. And if the amount of money that's being spent is not causing inflation, you wouldn't have to pay a tax. And that brings us full circle to the 8 principles of effective groups. Because the movie effectively manages world resources for the betterment of all. It's a group that works. It has clear boundaries. It has to do with money. It provides benefits that exceed the costs for everyone involved. It uses the existing methods of central bank decision making or conflict resolution. It has clear methods of monitoring and resolving any monetary issues where they check to see whether the inflation or the unemployment is higher or lower and adjust things accordingly. And it can be implemented with existing authority. The central banks already make new money. This would just give them a protocol for how they would do it. And it integrates well with the existing monetary policies. So that fulfills all 8 principles of healthy groups, and that is how we can get from here to there, and how you'll be able to thrive even in an era of technological unemployment. And now I'll take any questions. Sure.
Are you going to require it to be paid back?
No. The only reason to pay it back is if you need to take money out of the system. And therefore it can be paid back from anyone in the system to remove it. That's why adding a small inflation tax would take money out. But for example, when we had the recent wars of choice, we spent millions, if not, is it millions or billions?
3 trillion.
3 trillion, I had the wrong letter entirely. $3 trillion on those wars. We did not experience inflation because where that money was spent did not have anything to do with the supply and demand of the basic things we wanted to use in our lives. And it's not until it starts affecting those that you would start getting inflation. So there's no need to take the money back out of the system.
So you, at the end, tied it back to these 8 principles of healthy groups, but I don't think you actually addressed them all, but there was one in particular that had to do with your rewards being commensurate with your contribution to the group.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a fan of UBI, but this would seem to contradict that principle.
Well, no, it doesn't, because everybody gets the exact same amount. So everybody is a member of the group of people getting a UBI, and everybody gets the exact same amount from that system. Now, whether that makes a really big difference to their life or not is different, but everybody does get the same amount.
So this is different than Elon Musk's proposal to just tax robots?
Yes. Because again, if you tax the robots And robots are not the only thing that is responsible for automation. There's a lot of software that just automates things that no robot is involved in. But if you tax the robots, you are penalizing the people who are trying to advance making production more efficient, more effective, cheaper for everyone, and disincentivizing them from improving everyone else's lives. And it makes a lot more sense if you are taxing the people who are consuming things.
So the concept of taxes, it sounds like you're pretty much defining it as something that is used to either incentivize or penalize people. My understanding of taxes from a more general sense was that its main purpose was to enable the government to pay for the impacts on society that industry and private industry was unwilling or unable to pay for by itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, which strikes in my mind a link to that needs to be made to the overall impact that people have on each other that is not tracked by the economy.
Yes.
And taking a big leap up to the concept of ecological economics, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but the idea of tying the size of the economy to the amount of natural resources and making that the measure of how much money is in the economy rather than what is just can be put in by fiat.
Okay, so you've got two things going there. The question of taxes and the question of, is there a true value to an economy over and above how much money we've printed? And I see you and I will get you. As far as taxes go, I've been talking about taxes as they would relate to the movie. The government is perfectly capable of taxing other things if they so choose. According to Adam Smith, there were 4 crucial ways that taxes needed to be set up in order for them to be fair and equitable. For example, it's not fair to tax everyone who lives in a state for a highway, and people from out of state can drive on that highway with no problem. That's the whole nature of why you put toll booths on highways. But a lot of taxes that are based simply on income are done so because it's easy, not because it is effective or fair. And therefore, if you can do something that is equally easy but is more equitable and fairer, it would make more sense to move in that direction. And that is going to be a very large political hurdle for people to get over. However, if the movie piece can get established, that does not rely on getting rid of other taxes or making them make sense. And it can gradually move in that direction. The other one was about a true value for an economy. As far as that goes, what you're really talking about when you're talking about money is the ability to exchange value. So if I want some good or service, and Kevin can provide me that good or service, if I have money, I can just buy it from him. If I don't have money, I have to find some other good or service that he wants so we can arrange some sort of a trade. It's very inefficient. So by having a lot of money in the system, you are enabling more of these transactions. You're not specifically saying that a certain piece of money has any intrinsic value other than what they've agreed upon between different people in the system to rate that money as, and it's just used as shorthand to enable them to transact with each other. Okay.
Is there any indication of whether this will increase or reduce vices like alcoholism and drug addiction and human trafficking? And
There is some early evidence from limited studies that it will in fact decrease certain vices and certain criminal behaviors. In part of that is because many times people are indulging in these vices because they feel that they are trapped in a life or a lifestyle that they have no way out of, and they don't see any worth for their existence in that life. But they can't think of any way that they can get out of it and get into a life that would be better. And the drugs and the alcohol or the other addictive behaviors temporarily give them a sense that they're in control of their life and that they have something to enjoy. And if they are able to get some other means of meeting that need, the reliance on external addictive substances or behaviors tends to lessen. Also, things like human trafficking, that relies on people desperately needing money and willing to do anything like selling their children into slavery or participating in a kidnapping ring where if they are caught, they will suffer significant consequences because they need the money to survive. And if they get money that they can use to survive, they won't participate. You may still have the people who would be the end users of such a thing, but it will be harder for them to have the illegal substances or illegally captured and transported people that they want, because the people who would supply it are no longer motivated out of desperation to survive themselves.
What about gambling all over the world?
Again, any sort of addictive behavior that you are doing in order to feel like you have some control in your life, or to feel like you're special, or give you some little bit of pleasure, some of that will be offset. Sometimes there is still an underlying psychological issue and you will need help and treatment for that. But the percentage of people that are able to successfully break the addiction themselves will be higher. For example, when people were over in Vietnam fighting the Vietnam War, the number of soldiers who were addicted to things like morphine was incredibly high. And there was quite a lot of fear that you would have all of these drug addicts coming back to the United States and it would be a huge problem. But what actually happened is the vast majority of the soldiers who were using drugs in Vietnam, when they came back to the United States, if they had a support network and they felt reabsorbed back into their community and they were able to once again do something they considered to be productive instead of slaughtering people, they stopped using drugs just because they had no more need for it. So similarly, when people are able to provide for themselves through a UBI and they're able to devote their lives to things that matter to them, their reliance on other substances or behaviors will go down. Yes?
Our current system for creating money through the Fed creates debt when money is created. In the Constitution, Congress has the power to create sovereign currency. They delegate that to the banks. So are you conceding that we might go back to a sovereign currency mode like Lincoln did during the Civil War when he issued greenbacks? Or if not, if it's the current system, it will keep increasing debt as the UBIs are paid out?
That does imply that the UBIs would be created as a debt mechanism, and they would not have to be. They could be created simply at a flat value where they did not need to be repaid. It's also one or more of the implementation protocols is to use cryptocurrencies. And the very nature of the cryptocurrencies are that they are an ever-expanding base of value, where the act of creating, for example, the blocks in a blockchain produces yet more pieces of cryptocurrency in order to authorize those blocks. So even if you don't introduce any new money, the system itself is continually introducing new money, and it does not incur a debt. It's just part of the way the system is designed.
You kind of touched a little bit about it now, talking about Bitcoin, using the blockchain. But how would it work internationally? Say if I import a good, I'm contributing to that outside market's inflation, and I may get taxed. Have the inflation tax, but that would still only help or go towards my local market. So how there may not be a mechanism for the outside market to decrease the supply of money.
Correct.
How do you address
Currently, the way people are looking at it is they are looking at the central banks working together, but implementing something like the movie individually by country. Part of that has to do with, in developed countries, it's really easy to track individuals, and in less developed countries, you are not as easily able to ascertain exactly who you have in your country. Therefore, when you would be moving in between countries with your imports or your exports, that wouldn't directly relate to your inflation rates because of how the movie was viewed on whether or not you were producing or consuming something. But because the different countries would all be working through the same central banking system, they'd be looking at how's overall inflation doing, how's overall demand on resources doing, and be able to adjust individually to try and fix that.
So are you saying that it wouldn't be truly universal?
It would be somewhat universal as it's currently being proposed, in that everyone would get some, but it would depend on the individual circumstances within that country whether or not that country could support a higher or lower amount of UBI.
Can you kind of clarify, you say that the money would be created, doesn't that increase the overall pool of money, thereby reducing the individual value of everyone else's money? And isn't that by its very nature a redistribution of wealth? Everyone else's money will be less valuable as there is more money.
It doesn't change things if it doesn't produce inflation. Because if I have $1 million and now an additional $1 million has been put into circulation, but the prices haven't changed, my $1 million will still buy exactly what it did before that extra $1 million came into the system.
But that's not how money works.
That's why it needs to be managed as to whether or not it's causing inflation and then withdrawn from the system that way.
So by managed, does that mean that the price of goods or the value of money would be fixed by an authority, assuming a government or something like that, so that $1 would buy $1 worth of goods?
There are proposals that do that. I am assuming that since the central bank is supposed to be managing inflation and unemployment now, that this would just be another tool for them to do what they're already supposed to be using. And I'm not a central bank expert. Did you have a thought on that?
So where do you withdraw it from the system? If you naturally withdraw it, you just reduce everybody's UBI on a monthly basis. So you can't really plan then what your UBI is going to be.
The way that you would reduce it would be that there would be a small tax based on transactions. So as you spent things, you would be paying money into the pool of stuff that went back to the central banks to take it out of circulation, as well as the actual cost of whatever it is you were buying.
I forget who the gentleman was who made the comment that, quote, "that's not how money works." We all have certain expectations about how money does work or should work. And these expectations come from, in most cases, I would say, the economic philosophy that we've bought into. And these philosophies, while they can differ tremendously, you can actually have the freshwater economists and the saltwater economists who both are full of contempt for the other school. There are testable results in how money actually behaves. And the MUBI system is designed to gradually, and that's key, gradually, and systematically change the entire system such that if a problem such as the inflation I think this gentleman was alluding to arises, it can be offset. The very money that was injected into the system causing the inflation, were that to happen, is pulled out. This transaction tax would at first, before the larger vision of MUBI were ever implemented, that transaction tax would only be used to take the money back out of the system, thereby removing that inflationary pressure. But I just want to add a challenge here, and I throw this out to all of you, you in particular, sir. I would have thought, as you did, that had to be so, that had to be how money worked. And yet, here we have the fact that the United States spent $3 trillion, $3 trillion, on 2 wars of choice, and yet we did not have a significant increase in inflation as a result. So clearly, money doesn't have to work the way you and I would have intuitively expected that it should. So this comes down to a great experiment. Let's put our expectations, our philosophies aside. Let's actually test what works. If the MUBI works, it can be gradually increased. $10 a week, $10 a week. If it doesn't, it can be frozen.
Could you elaborate or just recap what the significance of the M in MUBI is? Because I'm not sure.
Market-oriented.
Well, I know what it stands for, but I'm not sure how it differs, if it does, from UBI as I've come to understand it.
Part of the underpinning of the MUBI is that the view of capitalism and market economics as being something that's inherently competitive is in fact wrong. That there is competition between companies, between individuals, but the greater portion of the system is actually cooperative. So if you think about Coke and Pepsi, they are die-hard competitors, each trying to get the dollar of the person who wants to buy a soda. But there's cooperation from all of the people who are harvesting the goods that need to go into these. The people who are manufacturing the glass bottles, the people who are manufacturing the plastic bottles, the distribution companies that are shipping these bottles all over the place, the stores that are carrying them on them shelves. These are all done in cooperation, and we see the competition piece of it, but we don't see like the bottom of an iceberg. We don't see the greater part that is cooperative. And therefore, by making the UBI part of the market economy, it will be working in conjunction with all of the parts that are cooperative rather than being competitive and driving a wedge between the people who are getting the money and the people who think the money is coming from them. Did that help at all? And if not, Michael Haynes has like a 40-page paper describing it in far more detail than I ever could, and he probably makes a lot better points than I do.
Are there any assurances that the movie will be used for essentials?
No. No, you could take the money and, blow it all on a gambling trip to Las Vegas. The point is that if everyone gets an equal amount, then everyone should have their minimum needs met. And if you choose to use the money for something else, then you're choosing to not allow your needs to be met. And in general, that is kind of indicative of an underlying psychological problem, in which case it should be the psychological folks who are helping to fix that.
Responding in a little bit more depth to the question, how does this differ from other approaches to UBI? I studied all of the different proposals for funding UBI that I could find a few years ago, and I decided none of them was viable and sustainable in the long term, and actually published a paper entitled Guaranteed Mirage Income. The argument being that they were all actually a mirage because they all involved either redistribution from folks who, as others have pointed out, will not acquiesce to that redistribution gracefully, if at all. And as assets become increasingly portable and intellectual rather than physical, it becomes increasingly easy for those with the assets to simply move to a different country that's more accommodating. And some, such as, I forget his name at the moment, Piketty, have proposed that we have a global tax to which everyone must adhere. And to me, this is a fantasy, because he's saying that should be feasible, and yet we can't even achieve any kind of effective tax treaty in the present, much more modest system. So why would that be possible? MUBI doesn't require that redistribution. It doesn't drive wedges. It doesn't drive division amongst the different groups in society, be they rich or be they poor. It has an inherent fairness, as Jennifer has spoken to. And there are many other issues with the redistribution, and some say, well, look at the Alaska Permanent Fund there. They're using oil to pay an income to all Alaskans. Others propose similar schemes. Every such scheme that I have seen depends upon an asset whose value is fluctuating and whose future cannot be assured. What happens in the future when oil drops to $10 a barrel, as has been forecast by major German and Abu Dhabi banks? What does that do to the Alaska Permanent Fund? Any such UBI that relies upon asset redistribution of any sort is fraught with these risks.
I have a couple other questions about the money. So is capital gains also no tax, as just like income? And if I take out a loan to buy a home, is that consumption?
All right. Capital gains would be considered a type of income. So just like the other types of income, whether it's rent, royalties, dividends, capital gains, or the income that you make from your job, they look at it as if you put all that money in a bank, and wherever the source of the income is, it just goes to the bank. And then you don't have to pay any taxes on it until you actually do something with it, because for as long as it's sitting there, it's not having any impact on inflation. It's only when you go and you buy something with it that you're changing the amount of demand for something, and therefore could increase inflation. So to put this in perspective, consider Warren Buffett. He makes a whole lot of money, but he's still living in the same house he bought decades ago, and he has a very modest lifestyle. On the other hand, you've got these internet millionaires who their company did an IPO, they suddenly have a vast amount of money, and they blow it all on flashy cars, the McMansions, and luxury trips around the world. They're spending that money and greatly increasing the potential for inflation. So they should be taxed far more than Warren Buffett, who's not impacting inflation, even though he has far greater income.
And the second part, if I buy a home, take a loan, is that a consumption? Or do I pay a tax on buying a home?
You know, am not exactly certain how that would work. The actual purchase of a home would be consumption, but the fact that you took out a loan in order to make that purchase, I'm not sure whether or not the tax involved in the consumption, maybe the bank would just put that as part of the terms of your loan so that you paid back part of it each portion of the time that you lived in the house. That would be a detail that somebody who has far more economics background than I would work out.
Could people sell their movie income streams or commit them to a mortgage?
I'm certain someone would try to do that. I don't know whether or not there would be regulation to try and prevent people, similar to the predatory lending practices now, of saying, if you're taking someone's basic income to pay their mortgage, you're not leaving them any money to pay for food, so you are being predatory and we will come down on you with a fine.
Getting into some fine-grained questions. None of us is the expert on movie. If you want to send these questions to us, we can put them to Michael Haynes, and he probably has considered these in his decades of thought. But as you're probably aware, you cannot do this with your Social Security income. So it would be fairly trivial for the government to similarly stipulate that you cannot do this with your movie if that was the policy they wished.
So we're going to do 2 more questions and more of the 2 I'm asking now.
Okay.
This seems predicated on the idea that having a central authority that expands and contracts the money supply is a good thing, and it's not clear to me that that's the case. How are we going to deal with the problem of inflating the credit supply, for example, artificially lowering the interest rate, distorting the capital structure, and crowding out the kinds of market signals that entrepreneurs use to make long-term investments? We'll have these proliferating malinvestments in the economy that eventually will have to be liquidated in recession. That underlies the entire concept, undercuts the entire concept of having a Federal Reserve at all, and this seems to be based on exactly that mechanism for managing inflation and paying out.
Again, you are way beyond my level of economic understanding.
Well, we've got negative interest rates now. See the present.
Yeah.
It's happening right now.
Right.
You buy a corporate bond in Europe and you pay.
And
So
I
get
think
the
that
money.
having sovereigns and their central banks trying to manage the money supply and treating the interest rate as though it's just a knob you turn on a dashboard is a lot of what's lying behind that. It's just not a good thing at all.
Going into the more distant future, the later decades of this century and beyond, we may see some extraordinary experiments with whole new country structures, as I talk about in my book, that do not involve a central banking authority, which you would seem to advocate. But I would submit that for the foreseeable future, the central banking authorities perform a function that is generally considered vital or at least important, and there are considerable, powerful interests that rely upon the structures that the central banking authorities enable, and they will not allow anything short of violent revolution to remove those structures. So in my view, this is perhaps not a full answer to your thought, but in my view, the kind of thing you're proposing will probably not happen until we literally create new countries from scratch, as I and allies have advocated.
Okay, we've got one more. I don't think you've asked a question yet.
I've been patient. I'm part of the new revolution that's taking down the central banks. I'm part of the largest trust in the world. We're hundreds of years old, and the trust that I work with is the silent 12th part of the 11 financial districts of the world. We're called the silent 12th. And we actually funded the IMF, the World Bank, United Nations, the Rothschilds, and many, many others. 1948, after the Marshall Plan, we started taking interest and dividends that were rolled up into above the central bank, the Bank of International Settlement, the BIS. So we are account number 1 at the BIS. We set up accounts for every sovereign nation of the world. And also this particular trustee is a sovereign entity unto herself. So she has her own FMCA code, 16-digit number. do full due diligence on government screens called the S2 governmental system. So we are in the process as of about 4 months ago, starting to, I speak with presidents of countries. I talked to the president of Zimbabwe about 2 weeks ago about their new currency in the Zim notes and what they're going to do because of their large number of in-ground assets. So we talk about resource-based, mainly in high technology and sciences primarily. But when I was asked to help the trust a couple of months ago, this global transformation is going on right now. So we're clearing the debt of countries and then funding all of their projects. Last week I started moving $15.75 billion into Zimbabwe with another 4.25 and another 8 billion. We're going to do this for tens of years, so decades going forward. So this week I'm talking with 5 other countries, so this is going to be working its way around the world. So when they stop funding all of these entities and defunding IMF, World Bank in 2013, 2014, the Rothschilds contract ended in 2017. And the United Nations, you may have noticed about a month ago, was on national news saying we're broke, we're out of money, countries loan us money. And they want 50 million right now to help out Indonesia because of the earthquake, tsunami, and all of that. So there's a big shift in money. That ties in with the global shift to a gold-backed system with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and rebalancing of world funds to be done through the special drawing rights called the SDR, and much, much more. And now getting away from the SWIFT system and the corruption that has withheld and suppressed humanity for hundreds of years. So we're taking the foot off the neck of countries and liberating them to give people dignity and work, and through education, hospitals, jobs, technology transformation. When I was on the 45-minute call with the president of Zimbabwe and the trustee, she said basically, and it's a woman that has a U.S. passport, that is a sovereign entity with more security than President Trump. So when they wanted to do quantitative easing 1, 2, and 3, in QE3 we printed $80 billion a month. They had to get permission from this trustee to do that and have that gold backed. So the trust is the largest holder of bullion in the world. So all of this is shifting just as we're moving to a gold-backed system. And if you look at House Bill HR 5404, that'll... Oh, okay, well that was the one I wanted to give you. Anyway, have fun. It's changing, but you're a little out of sequence. It's okay.
Okay, well,
It'll trickle down.
so if anybody was wondering, that's the gentleman who has more economic knowledge than I do.
It will. It'll liberate humanity and slavery and indebtedness.
Dollars have been taken out of Africa already with natural resources, and those countries are still even more poor than they were.
They are, and that's why it's going to shift around, because China's making a move.
We're getting off the topic here.
All right, go ahead, but, so
let's get
Okay.
Jennifer in.
Yeah. Okay, I'll lay down for you. Nobody cares. Uh-oh.
So we need to have a drawing.
Oh, yes,
Oh, yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. Get rid of indebtedness.
So don't folks leave.
If you put your name in the basket, you might want to stick around for the drawing.
We're doing a book drawing, there's some book drawing.
Yeah.
Just set this down.
Yeah. There's going to be a lot of bullshit technology.